I will introduce Dr. Frank Dooley, Chancellor at Purdue Global. I'll read off a little bit about his very impressive background. But what I'm excited to talk about today is the fact that Frank has been at Purdue since 1998 on the residential campus in West Lafayette. And there he rose to Senior Vice President of Teaching and Learning, on had a very good perspective on the residential experience. Though in 2020, I think it was May 2020, right after the pandemic hit, he stepped into the chancellor role for Purdue Global, which is a fully online institution serving 36,000 learners. He was recently elected to the American Council on Education's board of directors, so has this very helpful perspective nationally on higher education. And we're just so thrilled to have Frank here today to speak with us. So Frank, I'll let you say hello to everybody.
Well, I am just delighted to be joining you, Jackson. Jackson and I have known each other for a few years now, and it's always exciting to get to share a story, to talk about the important work that we do. And I'm just looking at the people who are attending today, and I see a lot of old friends in the audience, so I'm glad to see them as well. So I'm excited. Let's get it going.
Let's get it going. I love it. So I'm going to start with the question we typically begin with, which is about you personally and your leadership. The question I'll ask is, what is your North Star in personally leading Purdue Global, such an innovative institution?
I love that question. I think it's a really it's a great starting point. I think, Jackson. So I look at the North Star, and I think there's probably three things that come to mind for me. The first one I'm going to say is to me, it's paying it forward. And by that, I mean, my life has been incredibly blessed. I have lived just a marvelous life. I've done things I've never thought when I was a young person that would be available. I didn't even maybe know that some of them existed. But in part, I had some incredible mentors growing up, people who guided me along the way. And I also was first-gen low-income student for college. And without them, I wouldn't have become college. So that might be it's a variant. I think my North Star is I'm grounded in being a servant leader. The second thing that I think is incredibly important to defining how I like to work is I'm pretty transparent in what we're going to do, why we're going to do it, how we're going to do it. But it also has to be combined with integrity. So people have to trust what you're saying and that you're going to deliver against what you say. And then finally, especially in a leadership role, I think one of the most important things I need to do is I need to articulate my goals, and I'll say it'd be the goals for the institution. So all the people are working really hard for Purdue Global and trying to deliver against the work that we do, understand where we're going and where they fit in the mission that we have.
I love that perspective on the importance of trust building and integrity. And I think that's a great segue into this theme of serving online learners who have in some ways been overlooked in the past in our country, in our education system. I'd love to hear how you think about understanding the needs of today's online learners or adult learners more broadly, and some of the ways you're building that trust through integral practices.
Yeah, that's another. You're going to have a lot of good questions. So I'll just acknowledge that. I think that the world is changing. Well, we all know the world is changing quite dramatically, and if I were to use Purdue, when Purdue bought Kaplan University and then converted it to become Purdue Global, the rationale that Purdue did it was a fulfillment of our land grant mission. So Purdue is Indiana's land grant. And a land grant, I don't know that everyone in the world understands what a land grant is. But if you go back to 1862, think about this. The middle of the Civil War, Congress takes up and creates the Morrill Act, which established the land grants. And the whole rationale for the land grant was we were creating institutions to provide educational opportunity to the masses. All right. And in particular, they're focused on the mechanic arts and agriculture and military arts. Now, fast forward. When we think of land grants across the country, I mean, every state has them. There was a second land grant act in 1892 that established the HBCUs, many of them across the country. There was a third land grant act or land grant status to the tribal colleges in the mid 1990s. So there has been this steady expansion of land grant, and if you go back to providing opportunity, all right. Now, technically, there are institutions that look very much like I do. Maryland Global comes to mind, Southern New Hampshire, Western Governors. These are very large institutions, and the vast majority of our population are working adults. While there has been a formal designation as a land grant, it is very much the same mission. So why working adults? I would say it's because the economy that we live in, the jobs that we have today require many more people to have an education to fulfill the requirements of that workforce. So much of what we do, almost all of our students come to us, they're close to 30 when they come to us. They're not looking for the 18-year-old college experience. What they're looking for is something that is going to move them forward in their degree or move them forward in their life and their career. And it's nothing more when you go back to the Morrill Act, expanding opportunity.
And one of the perspectives that I know you'll share throughout this conversation is having been a leader at West Lafayette, serving a largely residential population, a more traditionally aged population. And then all of a sudden, right after the pandemic, you're thrust into a role serving students who are on average around 30 years old. It's a very different population, very different needs and lived experiences. How would you comment on some of the transitions you've had to make moving from one population to the other?
That's a really good question. And I am somewhat of a purple unicorn or whatever, a pink squirrel, whatever you want. I believe it or not, Jackson, I was teaching online courses. One of the reasons Purdue hired me back in 1998 is I had been already teaching online in the mid 1990s. So online, I was familiar with it. And then I spent almost a decade in the provost office at Purdue. And as you said during my introduction, focused on the undergraduate programs in the West Lafayette campus. And, it's a Big Ten school, great institution and wonderful students to work with, wonderful faculty, great advisors and staff. And we did some fun things. I would say I've probably done 180-degree pivot is probably the best way. And probably what it reflects, I love what I'm doing today too. And it's I think the difference, the main difference is the student body that I have. Now, the students that I have, guess what? They're still looking for an education that helps them fulfill their life goals. That's no different than what the 18-year-olds at West Lafayette have. The difference is, there's a couple differences, and they're very stark. The 18-year-olds coming to West Lafayette and Ohio State and Wisconsin and other places like that, these individuals, oftentimes we talk about, they come and they change their major. It's not that they didn't know what they wanted to do. They came and they had a consideration set that was like this wide, right? And they could have done many things. And part of being 18 is to discover the path in your first couple years and then choose a path and move forward on it. Part of the path is also building a lot of the socialization skills and your involvement with communities and service to. I mean, it's very much if you want to call it growing up to a certain extent. Okay. Now, let me flip it around, and maybe I can take a course that we teach on my campus and we teach on West Lafayette campus. Accounting, intro to accounting. If I'm the professor teaching accounting to the 18 and 19-year-olds, one of the things I'm doing when I'm teaching to these really smart people who are really good at taking tests is I give example after example after example, because as smart as they are and as capable as they don't know very much. And in particular, they don't know how to apply theory. Now you flip it around. I have students who have been, let's say, an account clerk for a decade. And they really understand the process of a particular part of their job. And probably it's like somebody came and said, hey, Jackson, you're really good at what you do. You're very valued by our organization. But for you to move forward in the company, you need to get some more education. And moreover, in our company, we even will help you pay for that, right? And I mean, a lot of our students have an education benefit. You come to the classroom with learning in hand. You come to the classroom, though one of the things that we see in our case is, while you understand the application, sometimes what you have to learn is how it fits across a broader set, how it intersects with different aspects of, let's say, the finance system. You know that the account clerks, but where does it fit into other parts? And that's a different type. A couple other quick differences. The Big Ten type of students and residential 18-year-olds, the world that they grew up on was based on exams, right? I mean, whether it was the and I know we've gone test optional and things like that, but in the day it was, SAT, ACT, once you get to class, lots of exams, and they're really good at it. High stakes exams. You come to us, we don't give high stakes exams for the most part. Rather, we give lots and lots of assessment almost on a daily, if not a weekly basis, right? And it's more like, for you to move on, let's make sure you understand this particular concept, because that feeds this particular, that feeds this. Now, do we have places where there is assessment? All of our nursing students who graduate take the NCLEX text, which is an exam, administered across the country. So they can do it, but we just find for the working adult, especially if, let's say you're 30, college didn't go all that well the first time for a variety of reasons. You didn't find a relevance. You might have had, you couldn't afford it. The phrase that sometimes it gets tossed around is life got in the way. You're now back, you're with me. And what I think I'm going to evaluate what maybe your course, instead of 3 exams in a paper, might now be 40 assignments that are all worth, let's say, 10 points, 10 to 20 points. It gives you the ability to build confidence. It gives you the feedback so you don't get so far behind before you have to try to now, make up for losing out on the first few concepts. So, it's almost like a real-time evaluation of what we're doing. There's one more big difference. My students, for the most part, are here for career advancement. Whereas the 18-year-old in the West Lafayette campus is looking for, I'm going to call it, not only life identification or life goals and setting direction. My students know I'm going to work at this company because I have a family to take care. I have many things have been decided for me. But what I need to do is I need to move forward as fast as I possibly can in my career to make it a better life situation for myself and for the family I'm with.
I love those 3 tenets, and I would argue that 18-year-olds also probably need number 2, which was this nurturing sense of progression. I think when you step foot even on a college campus, the fire hose of information, the sights, the sounds, are akin to being a working parent while also going to school online when you might not have been successful the first time. And I think that sort of takes me to my next question, which we talked a little bit about last week, the sort of burden on students today, beyond the classroom experiences. And mental health is such a topic among higher education leaders today. The Surgeon General put out this report a couple months ago, described America as having a loneliness epidemic. How do you think about serving the whole student when you don't necessarily see them on campus? You don't have that connectivity. How do you build that into an online culture?
That's another fabulous question, and actually, as you just pointed out, it's just as relevant on a residential campus. There are students lonely on the residential campuses as well. There are several things that we do, but probably the most important thing that we're doing at this juncture is every one of our classes typically has a weekly 1-hour synchronous course, and you're expected to show up maybe at 7:30 on Tuesday night, and everybody in the class comes. It's not a lecture for the most part, but more it's rather the week's compilation of here have been the key themes of the week. Here's what I've seen in the work that you've submitted. And maybe think of like a YouTube short. Here's a 10-minute lecture, and this is why it's important. This is what we're building towards. The faculty that I have, most of my classes are relatively small, and the average size is around 25 students. And one of the things that is the culture of our institution is that the faculty take a great pride and a great ownership of the students in their class. And one of the things that we're doing even now is we're working, and I'll call it one of these things that falls under the umbrella of student success, is we're trying to give more tools to the faculty. Like, Jackson typically would submit his homework on Monday between 9 and 10. It's now Tuesday morning. We haven't seen anything. Do you want to reach out to Jackson and just make sure everything's okay? And so that is probably the most important mechanism that we have it. We do have some online counseling opportunities. I think the big difference between for the online institution and for the residential institution is when I was in the provost office, every year we expanded counseling and mental health opportunities on campus, and that has, with COVID, has even gone further from the demand perspective, and it can be a really healthy, right? I mean, something here is good. When I was a young man, when I was a student, it was very hard for people to admit that they needed help. And help can take many different forms. So the fact that what encourages me about our younger generations, and there's many things that encourage me about our younger generations, is their willingness to seek help. Now, my case, online purely, how do you do that? Once again, the faculty in the course, a handful of supplements. We are looking at other solutions even now. I have a task force that's trying to answer those questions. I'm confident, Jackson, that there's much more that we need to do, and we'll keep going at it day after day after day.
I think you alluded to something we see in our work, is that the help-seeking behavior is not something that comes easy, depending on the cultural context you're in, depending on the vulnerability you need to express by even asking for help. And I'm curious if you've seen, whether at West Lafayette or at Purdue Global, ways that institutions can remove the friction, lessen that sort of mental burden of raising your hand and asking for help, culturally or systematically.
I see it in every institution I've been at, that it's something that is front of mind for me, to be quite honest. I don't have the answer today, but when I get opportunities with students, especially new students starting, the number one thing that I'll say to them, I give you permission to ask for help. And I think especially when we're like 50% first gen students. And we all know part of the challenge of being first gen is you simply don't know what you can and can't do. So what we're trying to do, and most of our profs in our course is the same thing. They try to, on day one of, how do you start the first day of class? You explain, here's the ground rules. And we work very hard to tell them, we're here to help you, but I can only help you if I know where you need help. Okay. So, but I think it's just human nature. And I think you used the word culture. Culture would be part of what defines that. It is incredibly hard to ask for help. And I think sometimes people worry about asking for help too early, which is understandable. But then it's this fine line. If you wait too long, it might be too late to give you the help they need. This is something we will continue to focus on and zero in on, because I'm confident we're never going to get it 100%, right? And we're just going to have to be relentless in it. I think it's also something for online. It's one of the differences. It's probably easier to hide, and by hiding, I mean, you might come to a class and you turn off your camera and all these kind of things, and are you there or are you not there? So that's where I really rely on the faculty. But I will say one thing is that relative to West Lafayette and my most recent experience, I don't get the pleas for more expansion of, let's say, counseling services that I do, because I do think our faculty do an awfully good job of establishing that trust relationship with the student. I'll share one last thing is, when I am with students, especially at graduation, the one question I ask everybody: who is the most influential or the most important person to you in your time as a student with us? 19 out of 20 times it was a professor. And most of the time, the reason given is, I was in class and I had to pull a double shift for 2 weeks. And I reached out to my professor and told her that, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to get anything done. And what they said, I'll work with you, and I'll help you get through it. So I'll go back to the culture of an institution can be one of the things that does that. I'm so proud of the faculty we have here, because they really take on the student body that we have and do an amazing job with recognition of what the question we're talking about.
So many good themes in what you just shared. I want to go back to one that really stuck with me. 50% first gen population, and the intention of teaching the hidden curriculum. If you teach it, it's no longer hidden. So knowing the ground rules of what you can and can't do as a first gen student, I think incredibly important. I imagine there's even another layer to that. If you're a working adult in an online format, like, what am I allowed to ask of my professors and not? That's so important. And then I think there's this sort of dichotomy between the cultural reactive elements of lowering the barrier to asking for help, having professors who have lived experiences similar to their students, who create that space in the virtual classroom. But then, and you talked to me a little bit about this last week, there's also this proactive or quote intrusive practices. So I'm wondering, not just specific to mental health, but you talked about prompting faculty when a student's not attending class, or success coaching, formal roles where you're intrusive into the student journey and saying, hey, you might not know it yet, but there's something going on that I can help with. What does that look like? How do you operationalize that for 36,000 students?
Well, I mean, one of the beautiful things about data and technology is there are things that we can do today that we couldn't do. And one of the advantages to being fully online is there is a digital trail on everything that you've done. And as we're able to strengthen ourselves with our analytical capability, hopefully some of it has a predictive power. And once again, if I can simply use that to spur the conversation, let me throw one aspect to it. We have what's called, and it's a policy we're in the midst of reviewing as we speak, called leave of absence. And here's another big difference between myself and a residential university. Most of the schools are getting ready to report their IPEDS number in the next month, right? And one of the numbers on there is first year retention. And there's a presumption within the world of financial aid, there's a presumption within the world of higher ed and rankings and all these things, a higher first year persistence or retention and, 4-year graduation. These are the things that matter. I have students, the best thing that you could do might be is to not go this term. Why? Work, family responsibility, mental health responsibility. I don't know what it is. So as we look at it, when one of the things that I did when I took over, and when I was at West Lafayette, we spent incredible amounts of energy and thought and work and investment against student success, because I don't think a model of student success is really many layers and because there might be one set of students who needs a particular solution. I might be a military vet. I need something different than, and you have to don't confuse that we have coaching. It's a phenomenal thing, and it's very, very important to this one population. I have an emergency aid program that we're building, but when I showed up, we had virtually nothing at the university called student success. I had a lot of people, a lot of faculty focused on it, but I did not have an office. I did not have so we hired a director of student success, Karen McGregor, who started with us a year ago in May. It's only been in the last 6 months that we started to hire coaches. We're now building out, but I go back to how important the faculty have been here. The faculty have been carrying that burden here for a long time. And now what we're trying to do is layer on top of that. And we know there's more layers we need to bring. But we're just going to keep going. And it's probably something that will not be done when I leave this institution at some point.
It's an enormous undertaking, those roles, whether formal or informal. The faculty are burdened by so much responsibility. It can't only be their responsibility. And I feel like I have to mention this Wall Street Journal article that came out a couple days ago on the amount of spending American public universities are putting against the decline in enrollment. And these things have costs associated with them: hiring success coaches, coming up with new interventions, mental health services. These are all things that as a leader you're seeing you need to invest in. At the same time, Purdue has somehow gone over a decade without increasing tuition, a fantastic statement to make in this climate. How do you reconcile what seems to be dramatically increasing need of students, and yet the cost pressure on higher education? How can leaders navigate in such an environment?
Well, I think Purdue, it is a good case study, and I would encourage, other people. It's certainly worth studying how Purdue accomplished it. I guess, Jackson, I read the article you're mentioning, and there are parts of, I think the themes that they raise are the right questions. I'm not sure that it was the strongest analysis that I've seen. I mean, there's a tendency that to blame it upon lazy rivers and amenities and things like that. And I don't think that it was very fair. I would say it's also the world of higher education is different today than probably when the authors of that story went to school. And like the points that you made, the expectation for mental health support on universities across the country, regardless of the population you serve. But that's true in society as well, right? One of the biggest problems on almost every campus is trying to find qualified counseling staff. Now let's make it even a little bit harder. let's say that I'm actually trying to find qualified African American counseling staff because I want a staff that reflects the population of students that I have. If I'm in a rural university in many parts of the country, that's a really difficult proposition to deal with. How do we do it? I will say that, we had a president by the name of Mitch Daniels, and it was paid a great deal of attention to cost. But that did not mean he was not willing to invest. And there's a difference there. And I think a little bit of Mitch has rubbed off on me. That means one of the ways that I like to think about it, and let's go with success coaching. I'm an economist by training, so that's going to explain my answer a little bit. If I have a student for only, let's say, 1 year, and for whatever reason they walk away, that's not particularly good. My goal as an institution is to increase my graduation rate. And that was the same thing on the West Lafayette campus. The board and President Daniels, we want more students to graduate with a degree. Same thing for me. How do we do that? One of the things we did, and I know you know Indiana well, Jackson, but we had 21st Century Scholars, which is a state program aimed at lower income students. But when I was in the provost office, they put in a requirement, they must earn 30 credits to keep the funding. Now, if you take funding away from low income students, what are they going to do? They're going to go. So what did we do? Very creative. We gave them summer, free tuition, free housing, and a job on campus. And you can take courses to meet your 30 credit threshold. And guess what happened? They stayed enrolled. Okay. And you looked at those students. The first year when that provision went in, I think we only kept something like 5% of the students in who were the 21st centuries who didn't meet the credit threshold. Flip it around where they are now, they're now graduating over 90% of those students. So guess what? It had nothing to do with their intellectual capability, had nothing to do with their academic ability. It had to do with they were poor. And it was a support. Now, go to the university. It cost me money. But guess what? I also was getting tuition back from these students for 4 years. So that there is a yin and a yang here. And I think when you look at having students for full years, for students going towards graduation from the university perspective, it's a win-win. And it's also, then you create an alumni base. So it goes on and on and on. So to me, but I caution, and this is, if you start trying to slice every program, that then you're probably, I went back to, when I talked about student success, there's not a student success program. It's a compilation, or it's a tapestry of different solutions. And I hope that we don't get to the point that I'm trying to cost out each one of them and having to make it have the amount of energy put into doing that would kind of not be worth it from my perspective. But in the totality, when you start to look at these efforts, if you see that if your retention rates are going up, if your graduation rates are going up, the tuition revenue that you're able to generate from having more students be successful tends to allow you to make these investments. At least that's how it's worked for us.
Well, there's certainly much to learn from the Purdue case study. The obsession on value and student success is definitely carrying forward, but it really does strike me that Purdue is an outlier in what is otherwise a sentiment of negativity towards higher education, and this declining perspective on the value of the degree. I think as a leader overseeing Purdue Global, which is on the forefront of innovation and new practices, I go to a lot of higher education conferences, and sometimes the conversations, we have to communicate differently. We have to reframe what we're doing. I think that holds a great deal of merit. And then there are others who say we have to do differently. But something has to be different. Either we change the practices, like you mentioned, 21st century scholars, or we communicate differently about the value of, say, a liberal arts education. How do you think leaders can start to change that public perception where higher education is really under threat from budgetary perspective? State funding is down, enrollment cliffs are coming. I don't want to paint too bleak a picture, but the work is more important than ever. How do you build trust in something that is changing lives?
And you didn't even mention the rise of non-credit, the micro-credentials and
Yep.
that. I mean, that's another thing. The Gallup Gallup poll had something recently about the American population's losing faith in a college degree, right? Boy, it's so bleak. I think I'm just gonna have to go. It's the reality that we face in higher ed. Okay. And I think a couple things that I want to say about funding. I have 2 or 3 answers here, and I'll try to be quick. One of the things, we shouldn't confuse state funding with the cost. So state funding is simply one of the ways that an institution has dollars to pay for salaries and to make investments in things like Mentor Collective, right? And other tools and solutions to help students. Many states, the funding that you get from the state is maybe about the same that it was in the year 2000 or less, right? And simply because state priorities have changed, right? What has come in its place? In a lot of cases, it's tuition. So when you talk about why is the cost of education has gone up because the states have invested. I think my recollection is if you went back to about 2000 state budget, the state line was roughly 50% of your budget. Now it's something down around 20% of your budget. So how have I replaced that? Tuition, all right, or alumni. And I mean, most institutions, you have alumni, but I mean, it's going to be a relatively small part of what the budget. The tuition dollar, then what has that been funded with? Student loans or Pell Grants and things like that. So what have we done in the United States? In the last 50 years, we basically changed higher education as something that was provided to something that now is more like I'm buying it and I have to pay for it with my own dollars. And when I have to pay for it with my own dollars, I'm much more worried, am I going to get a job? Am I going to be able to pay my loans back? Am I, so I think it's changed the way that our consumers of education are students and their families. Oftentimes, mom and dad are helping in many cases. So they come to it is you've got to be able to make sure that you can pay back the loans. So that is probably a big part of what makes this so complicated today.
And the outcomes and promise of higher education are all the more important in such a context. The workforce readiness, experiential learning, all the things that studies show today's students are looking for. But with our last question, as we're getting to time here, I'll try to bring us out of the pessimism. I want to give you a chance, because we have 80-some folks here live and others will be reviewing the recording, to talk a little bit about the experience of leading such a large enterprise. I know there's a lot of aspiring leaders that we engage with at Mentor Collective. What is it like to be a chancellor? I'm genuinely curious as a CEO myself. What does your week to week look like? How do you manage personally through all the challenges, policy, structural, budget, et cetera? What is it like to be Frank Dooley?
My life is busy. And I mean, I think, Jackson, I'm confident that your life is busy as well, but many people have very busy lives. But I would say, and I won't even talk about email, but the things that occupy my time would probably fall into 5 buckets. The first bucket is I go back, when I talked about my North Star articulating the goals. So we have what we call, the first year that I was here, about the year anniversary, we launched what we call our Purdue Global Moves, which is our strategic plan. There are 4 of them. Number 1, student success. Number 2, a focus on skills and the importance in education. Number 3, what is the classroom of the future? And number 4, what is our commitment and our building of an institution that is inclusive? So diversity, equity, and inclusion. I predict that those 4 pillars are not going to change in my entire time here, and I would hope my successor will probably want to run with them as well. But guess what? Even though you say that this is your goal, I spend time constantly reminding people, working against them. You know, we have many partners that how do you make a strategy something that drives the work? And that is part of what my day is. Second bucket is managing my talent. I have some of the most incredible people that I work with, and they're just phenomenal. But let's say that you are my registrar, or my provost, or a department head. One of the things that anyone who has decision-making authority at some point needs another decision to be approved. And so part of my job is saying yes or no. Part of my job is making sure that my leadership team understands my expectations of them. My third bucket, and this is one that I probably leaned into and learned, we get org charts, and every organization has an org chart. And what I'm challenging us to think about our org chart this year as Venn diagrams. And by that, let me give you one example. So we launched a brand new marketing campaign in April of this year. And our ads are really, really pretty cool. But one of the things when you change the marketing, I also had to change the people working in the admission team, because we're seeing a different type of a profile of student. We also had to work with the people who do our B2B marketing. So, and I found myself having a meeting on Monday with one person, Wednesday with another, and I was having a meeting talk about the same thing 3 times in a week. I go, and then I'd say, oh, Jackson, you need to talk to Alexandria. I'm saying, well, why don't I just have one meeting, call it a cabinet, and it's bringing bringing the people for a particular emphasis together so they can hear the same conversation. My fourth one and fifth one are closely related, so I'll just combine them. Board engagement. I think to be an effective chancellor, you have to understand what your board expects of you. You have to understand what their capabilities are, and that it's a very important thing to do. And then the last one, I spend time, I'll simply say, contemplating on the long-term why Purdue Global. All right. And by that, there's a few things. I read every day. I'll find stuff to read, and sometimes I just get an opportunity to skim it. Other times I get a chance to think. But Peter Drucker, one of the things that he suggested is, as a leader, the most important thing you have to do is give yourself time to think. So I tried to take that thinking time and let stuff percolate through and bring through. Those are the 5 things that I try to practice. I try to emulate. And there's a lot more I need to improve on. I'm not very good at showing gratitude to the great people that work for me. That probably needs to be my resolution if I'm going to add a 6, because there are so many people who deserve thank yous that I just don't get around to doing that.
I love how humble you are, Frank. To even say that and reflect on the places you can grow. I am 100% in the same boat. I need to work on the gratitude piece myself. My last short question, how do you make the time to reflect on the bigger picture? I think that's something everyone in their role could benefit from. Are you a morning person? Do you carve out time on the weekends? How do you tactically do that?
It's really hard. But what I typically do is in the morning, I have a notebook, and in the morning, I have this long list of things but this notebook says, here's what has to happen today. And every day I write in there reflection time. And by that, and when I'm looking, I got 6 things that need to be done today. I'm at this point in time, I'm done with 4 of them, which is pretty good. Okay. My reflection time is I walk a lot for my exercise. And sometimes I don't listen to a podcast. Sometimes I do, but sometimes I just walk and think. And that probably is the best time. But the other way to reflect is having conversations. You go back to, mental health. Big part of mental health is loneliness. And having conversations with people is a good way to do it as well. And they don't have to be people you work with. Okay. I have a daughter who lives in Carmel, the north side of Indy. We talk about her, she has her own company, and we talk about our work a lot. And I think we both benefit from it.
Well, I think that's a great place to end our conversation today. And I want to thank you, Frank, for taking the time to share your perspective with this broader group and have a conversation with me. For those watching the recording, you can watch this and other fireside chats on our YouTube channel, which is here on the slide. And I also want to make just a very quick plug, because I think one of them is in the audience. We're having a similar conversation with University of Arizona Online, in that case, specific to peer mentoring and student success. You're welcome to join us for that next month. But again, want to thank Frank for his time today, his compassion and example as a leader. We're very grateful to have you in our network, Frank, and let you get to the last 2 items on your list today.
Well, Jackson, I simply want to thank you for the invitation. I've enjoyed it. I always enjoy interacting with you. It's great to have people like you in higher education. And thank you to everyone who spent time with us today. So have a great day.